You know, baby, there's something about raising children that no one tells you. One day they grow up, and suddenly they think they're the parent. Oh yes, I'm talking about my daughter, my sweet little girl who used to cling to my apron, who couldn't sleep without hearing me hum her favorite lullaby. Now she was standing in my kitchen, pointing fingers like she owned the place. It started one Thursday afternoon. I was standing by the stove humming to myself, frying up some cornbread and chicken, my mama's recipe, the one that could bring peace to a broken heart. My daughter, Clarissa, barged in, waving her fancy phone like a badge of authority. "Mom," she said, "you shouldn't be eating fried food. You know what the doctor said." I smiled and said, "Baby, the doctor also said laughter keeps you young, and right now, I'm laughing at you telling me how to live in my own kitchen." But she didn't laugh. No, ma'am, she went around the house like she was on some kind of mission, moving things, cleaning things, throwing things away. I sat down and watched her boss me around, trying not to say a word. She'd open a cabinet and sigh, "Mom, why do you have so much sugar?" Then she'd peek in the pantry, "Mom, no one needs this many cans." I said, "Child, you're acting like you pay the bills here." But when she got to the freezer, that's when everything changed. She opened that door and her mouth froze like the cold air that hit her. She stared at something in there, eyes wide, her hand trembling. "Mom," she whispered, "what is this?" Inside that freezer was an old tin box wrapped in a faded towel. I hadn't opened it in years. I walked over, took it gently from her hands and said, "Sit down, baby." She sat at the table, confused, maybe even a little scared. I opened that box, and there they were, yellowed envelopes, a few photographs and a stack of small folded papers. She looked at me like I'd been hiding gold. But that wasn't gold, no, it was gratitude. Every envelope had her name on it, letters I'd written when times were hard, when she was little and we didn't have much. I'd write her notes late at night, telling her how proud I was, how I dreamed of a better life for her, how I prayed every day she'd have more than I ever did. I kept them frozen not for the words, but to preserve the hope I poured into them. There was also a photo of her daddy, the man she barely remembered. Before he passed, he told me, promise me you'll save something for her, something real." That box was his reminder, his voice, his love frozen in time. When she read those letters, tears started rolling down her cheeks. She said, "Mom, I didn't know." I smiled softly and said, "Of course you didn't, baby. You were busy living the life we fought for you to have. That's what parents do, we hide our struggles so you can shine without worry." She reached across the table, grabbed my hand, and for the first time in a long time she didn't talk like a boss, she spoke like my little girl again. "Mom," she said, "I'm sorry. I forgot who taught me how to stand tall." And I told her, "You didn't forget, sugar. You just needed a reminder that even the strongest roots grow from humble soil." From that day on, she stopped talking at me and started talking with me. The freezer became our secret place. Every few months we'd add a new letter, not just from me now, but from her too. Little notes of gratitude, memories, forgiveness, dreams. So when I tell you, don't let pride run your home, don't let generations clash over who's right. Sometimes love just needs to thaw out, just like that little box in the freezer. Because, baby, one day they'll open something you left behind, a recipe, a letter, a memory, and that's when they'll finally understand who you really were. So go ahead, keep your freezer full, not just with food, but with faith, forgiveness, and a little bit of frozen love. Oh baby, let me tell you something, time has a funny way of turning the world upside down. One day you're teaching your little girl how to tie her shoes, and the next thing you know she's standing in your kitchen telling you how to live your life. I remember when my Clarissa was no taller than my knee, running around the house with ribbons in her hair, giggling every time I'd call her my little sunshine. I'd pack her lunch for school, kiss her forehead and whisper, "Now be good, baby," and she always was. But somehow, somewhere between growing up and growing distant, she forgot that I was still her mama. It didn't happen all at once, no ma'am. It started little by little. She visit and rearrange my pantry, throw out my old cookbooks, tell me how I needed to modernize. I'd laugh it off and say, "Girl, these pots and pans been feeding this family since before you could spell your name." But she wouldn't laugh. She'd roll her eyes, talk about cholesterol, talk about clutter, talk about how things should be. I kept quiet because I'd rather bite my tongue than bite my child's spirit. But Lord, it ain't easy watching your own flesh and blood forget who taught her how to stand tall. I used to tell her, "Baby, respect don't come from degrees or money. It comes from remembering who gave you your roots." But the world she lived in taught her different. It told her that if she was smarter, richer, more modern, she was right, even if that meant making her mama feel small in her own home. She came over one afternoon wearing her business clothes, phone glued to her ear. She walked in like she was doing me a favor. I was frying chicken the way my mama taught me, a little buttermilk, a little spice just right. She wrinkled her nose and said, "Mom, you shouldn't be eating that. You know your doctor said cut back on fried food." I smiled and said, "Honey, the doctor said a lot of things, but he never said to stop living." She didn't find that funny. She sighed, went around the kitchen cleaning, muttering under her breath about how I needed help keeping the place tidy. I stood there, watching my own child treat me like I was the one who needed parenting. My hands were shaking, not from anger but from sorrow. You see, when you spend your whole life teaching your child right from wrong, and then she looks at you like you don't know nothing, it cuts deep, deeper than words can say. But I let her go on. I let her boss me around, let her talk to me like I was one of her employees, because that's what mothers do sometimes. We swallow our pride to keep the peace. We let them think they're teaching us, when really we're teaching them patience. She thought she was in control that day, but baby, I was just watching, waiting for life to humble her. Because life always does. And deep down I knew it wasn't arrogance that made her act that way. It was worry. It was love mixed up with pride. Sometimes our children don't know how to show care without control. They want to protect us. But they forget that we are the ones who once protected them, through storms, through hunger, through sleepless nights and silent prayers. I sat there at the table, sipping my tea, and I saw my daughter not as the woman she'd become, but as the little girl she used to be. The one who'd crawl into my bed when thunder scared her. The one who'd ask me, "Mama, will everything be okay?" And I'd always tell her, "Yes, baby, because Mama's here." Now the tables had turned. She thought she was the protector, the decision-maker. But the truth is, no matter how old they get, they're still your child. You can see right through their attitude, right into that little heart that still beats with uncertainty. And that's why I didn't fight her. I just smiled and let her boss me around, because one day I knew she'd open her eyes and see that all her power, all her confidence came from me. That's the circle of life, sugar. Children forget, but life has a way of reminding them. Sometimes it takes a hard moment, a little discovery, a quiet truth to make them remember. That's what was coming for my Clarissa, the freezer, that little tin box, and the truth she never expected to find. But in that moment I just let her talk, let her fuss, let her think she ran my house. Because I knew something she didn't respect doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just waits. And when it finally speaks, it humbles even the proudest hearts. Now let me tell you, baby, there's something special about that old freezer in my kitchen. It hums day and night like it's whispering secrets only I can understand. Most folks see it as just an appliance, a place to store leftovers, frozen peas, maybe some ice cream for a late-night treat. But for me, that freezer held more than food. It held my memories, my heart, and a part of my soul I wasn't ready to let go of. That day when Clarissa came over, marching around like she was the sheriff in her mama's kitchen, I didn't think much of it. I just let her do her thing. She dusted, wiped, opened cabinets, and scolded me about everything from sugar to salt. I sat quietly, sipping my tea, knowing she'd tire herself out soon enough. But when she walked over to that freezer and pulled the handle, baby, time just stopped. The cold air rolled out like a ghost from the past, and there she stood, frozen herself. Her hand trembled when she saw that old tin box tucked away in the back, wrapped in a faded towel. "Mom," she said, her voice suddenly softer, "what is this?" Now that box had been sitting in there for over 20 years. It wasn't fancy, just a rusty old tin that once held biscuits. But what was inside, well, that was the kind of thing you can't put a price on. I told her, "Baby, put it on the table. Let Mama show you something." She set it down gently, still looking confused. I untied that towel slow, like I was peeling back the years. Inside were yellowed envelopes, photographs, and little folded papers, the pieces of my past that I'd tucked away in the quiet cold. Hopping time wouldn't touch them. Clarissa looked at me like she'd found buried treasure. She picked up the first letter, and I could see her eyes scanning the faded ink. My handwriting shaky but strong. It was dated from the year after her daddy passed. She started to read, her lips moving silently at first, then she whispered, "Dear Clarissa." I wrote those letters during nights when the world felt heavy, when I didn't know how I was going to feed her or keep the lights on. I'd pour my heart out on paper, my fears, my hopes, my prayers. And I'd write to her about the kind of woman I wanted her to become. I'd say things like, "You are stronger than the storm, baby. Don't ever let life tell you otherwise." I'd tell her how proud I was of her even before she grew into who she is. And I'd write about her daddy, about how he loved her, how he wanted her to chase her dreams. When I was done writing, I'd fold each letter and tuck it into that tin box. Then I'd wrap it in that towel, the one her grandma embroidered, and I'd place it in the freezer. Why the freezer? Because, baby, I didn't want time to melt those words away. I wanted them to last. Paper fades in drawers and ink smudges in the heat. But the cold preserves. It keeps things as they were, pure and untouched. Clarissa's hands started to shake as she read. She found a picture of her daddy holding her when she was a baby, his smile wide and proud. She found an old grocery list I wrote when I was counting every penny, trying to make ends meet. And then she found a note that simply said, "If you ever forget how much I love you, come find this." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked up at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I had no idea you saved all this." I smiled softly and said, "That's because you were too busy living, baby, and that's what I wanted for you." See, that freezer wasn't just keeping food cold. It was holding on to the warmth of love that time tried to steal. It was my secret vault, my time capsule of motherhood. Every mother has something she hides away, a letter, a keepsake, a memory, because sometimes love is too deep for display. It needs to be tucked away somewhere safe, somewhere only the heart knows. Clarissa closed the box and pressed it against her chest. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have anything to say. No advice, no instructions, no judgment. Just silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. That freezer, baby, it taught her more than any lecture ever could. It showed her that love doesn't always look loud or modern or shiny. Sometimes it's quiet, frozen, waiting for the right moment to remind us where we came from. And in that moment, I saw the little girl I raised come back to me. Not the bossy woman with her phone and her plans, but the child who once believed her mama could fix anything. She reached across the table, took my hand and whispered, "Thank you." And I thought to myself, maybe that's what love really is. Something you preserve, something that waits, until the heart is ready to open the freezer and feel its warmth all over again. Oh child, when Clarissa lifted the lid off that old tin box, she didn't just open metal and paper. She opened a part of my soul I'd kept tucked away for decades. Inside were the letters I wrote when the nights were long and the world felt like it was pressing down on my shoulders. Back then, when her daddy passed, the house felt so empty you could hear the echo of your own heartbeat. There were bills piled high, dishes to wash, and a little girl to raise with nothing but faith and grit. But even when my body was tired, my spirit refused to give up. That's when I started writing those letters. Every night after I put her to bed, I'd sit by the dim light of that old lamp, my pen shaking in my hand, and I'd write. I didn't have money to leave her, baby. But I had words filled with love, prayers, and promises. I wrote about our struggles, yes, but I also wrote about hope. I told her that even though we were poor, we were rich in heart. I told her that strength doesn't come from comfort, it comes from surviving the storms. I told her that kindness would always outshine beauty, and that no matter how far life took her, she must never forget where she came from. Some nights I'd cry while writing. The tears would drop right on the page, smudging the ink. You can still see them, those little water stains. They aren't from rain, sugar, they're from a mother's love and a weary heart. But I never stopped. Writing those letters gave me peace. It was my way of praying with a pen. It reminded me that one day she'd be grown, and I wanted her to have something to hold on to, something real, something from my heart to hers. Now, I didn't tell her about the letters because they weren't meant to make her feel sorry for me. They were meant to remind her how far we came together. Each one carried a piece of our journey. The nights the lights went out and we played shadow games by candlelight. The mornings I walked her to school in the rain with holes in my shoes but a smile on my face. The Christmases when all I could afford was a homemade gift, but she'd light up like I'd given her the world. In one letter I told her about her daddy. I told her how he used to hold her tiny hand and whisper, "That's my little miracle." He didn't have much time with us before he passed, but the love he left behind was enough to fill a lifetime. I wanted her to know that, even when it felt like we had nothing, we were still blessed beyond measure. And baby, I wrote about forgiveness too. I told her that the world would hurt her, it always does, but she should never let bitterness take root in her heart. "Don't let anger steal your sunshine," I wrote. "You were born to shine, not to shadow." When Clarissa read those words sitting at my kitchen table, I saw something change in her eyes. That pride she'd been carrying, that need to control, to lecture, to prove, it started to melt away. She realized those letters weren't about the past. They were about the foundation she'd been standing on all along. Every bit of strength, every ounce of courage, every dream she had, it was all born out of those hard years we survived together. She looked up at me with tears rolling down her cheeks and she whispered, "I never knew, Mom." I smiled and said, "You weren't supposed to, baby. You were supposed to live free, that was the point. You see, that's what mothers do. We don't always tell our children what it took to build their wings, we just make sure they can fly. And when they soar high and forget to look down, that's all right, because we know life will bring them back someday. That's when they finally see the letters, not just the ones written on paper, but the ones written on their heart from the day they were born. Clarissa folded one of those letters and held it tight. I watched her shoulders drop, the tension fade from her face. It was like she finally exhaled years of misunderstanding. She realized that every time I said, "I'm fine," it wasn't pride, it was protection. I didn't want her carrying my pain. I wanted her carrying my strength. And in that moment, she understood what I'd been trying to teach her all her life, that love isn't always loud, and sacrifice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's written in fading ink, frozen in an old box, waiting quietly for the right moment to be found. So when she whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me," I squeezed her hand and said, "That's what mamas do, baby. We write love into existence, one letter, one prayer, one night at a time." When Clarissa finished reading that first letter, she just sat there, quiet as a church on a Monday morning. The kind of silence that hangs heavy, not awkward but holy. I could see the storm in her eyes start to calm, and right there at that kitchen table, something shifted between us. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. The air felt different, like love had finally found its way back home. She looked up at me, tears running down her cheeks, and whispered, "Mama, I had no idea." Her voice was small, shaky, the same voice she used when she was little and got caught doing something she shouldn't. But this time, there was no punishment, no scolding, just truth sitting between us like an open book. I reached over, took her hand and said, "You weren't supposed to, baby. You were supposed to live free, that's what we fought for." And I meant that. Every letter, every long night, every sacrifice, it wasn't for her to see or understand while she was growing up. It was for her to become. And she did. She became strong, independent, determined. I may not have liked the way she talked to me sometimes, but deep down I was proud. She had the fire I prayed for her to have, she just didn't know who lit it. She took another letter from the box, and I watched her read. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, and every now and then she'd stop, cover her mouth and shake her head. I could tell she was seeing me for the first time, not just as mom, but as a woman who had dreams, fears, and a whole world she carried quietly so her child could walk in peace. And that, sugar, is what people forget about mothers. They forget that we had a life before them, a story, a song, a struggle. They see the apron, the cooking, the rules, but not the heart that beats beneath it all. When Clarissa looked at me that day, she didn't see the woman she thought she had to correct. She saw the woman who had once been her hero. She slid the letter back into the box and whispered, "Mama, I've been so hard on you." I smiled and said, "Baby, that's all right. Sometimes we all forget where we came from." She cried harder then, not the kind of crying that needs comforting, but the kind that cleanses the soul. And I just sat there letting her feel it. Sometimes words get in the way of healing, silence can do what speech never could. Then she said something that broke me in the sweetest way. She said, "All these years I thought I was taking care of you, but it was really you still taking care of me." I reached over, brushed her hair out of her face and said, "That's how love works, baby, it circles back." And she just nodded, her head bowed low, like she was praying without saying a word. We sat there for a long while holding hands. The clock ticked, the tea went cold, and the air hummed with a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. She finally stood up, walked around the table and hugged me, not a quick, polite hug, but a full, trembling, heart-to-heart embrace. The kind of hug that says, "I see you now." In that moment, I wasn't her mother to be corrected or managed. I was her mother to be honored. I felt the years of misunderstanding melt away, all the eye rolls, the arguments, the distance, gone, just like that. Sometimes it only takes a single truth to melt years of ice. She said, "Mama, I don't ever want to forget what you've done for me." And I told her, "Then don't. Remember it by living right. Remember it by loving soft, forgiving quick, and thanking God for what you've got." After that day, she stopped talking at me and started talking with me. She didn't come over to lecture anymore. She came to laugh, to listen, to cook beside me again like she used to. We made a promise every month we'd write new letters, not just from me to her, but from her to me. Letters about gratitude, memories, and forgiveness. We'd put them right back in that tin box in the freezer, where love stays safe and time can't touch it. You see, baby, the moment she opened that freezer, she didn't just find letters. She found me. And when she did, she found a piece of herself she didn't even know was missing. Because when a child rediscovers their parent's heart, they rediscover their own roots. And roots, my dear, are what keep you standing when the storms come. That's the beauty of love. Sometimes it gets lost under layers of pride and years of silence. But when it's real, it finds its way back. And when it does, it doesn't come back quiet. It comes back strong, warm, and overflowing, just like a mother's love thawing after a long, cold season. You know, baby, love is a strange thing. It's the warmest fire and the coldest frost all at once. It can make you laugh so hard your ribs ache, and it can break your heart in the quietest way. But one thing I've learned in all my years is this: love doesn't die, it just waits. Sometimes it hides behind pride. Sometimes it freezes, just like that tin box in my freezer, waiting for the right moment to thaw. That day with Clarissa, when she finally opened that box and saw all those old letters, it wasn't just paper she was holding, it was time. Years and years of unspoken words, uncried tears, and unfelt warmth. And as she read, I watched her face soften. The anger, the arrogance, the bossiness, all of it started to melt away, little by little, like frost on a window when the morning sun hits it. She looked at me and said, "Mama, why didn't you tell me about all this?" And I said, "Baby, because sometimes love can't be taught with words. It has to be discovered. You can't explain sacrifice to someone until they've known struggle. You can't explain forgiveness until they've felt regret. And you can't explain love, not real love, until it's been buried, frozen, and brought back to life again." She held one of those letters to her chest like it was something sacred. And it was, baby, it was. Because it wasn't just about what I'd written, it was about what she finally felt. That kind of love doesn't come through lectures or rules, it comes through revelation. See, that's what I meant when I said love needs to thaw. Sometimes in families, love gets trapped under years of hurt feelings, misunderstandings, and that ugly thing called pride. We get so busy proving we're right that we forget to be kind. We forget that "I'm sorry" and "I love you" can heal more than time ever could. Clarissa and I had both built walls around our hearts, thinking we were protecting ourselves, but all those walls did was keep love out. That freezer moment, that was God's timing, not mine, because if I had told her about those letters years ago, she wouldn't have understood them. She was too busy building her life, trying to be strong. But now, after her own battles, her own heartbreaks, her own long nights, she was finally ready to feel what I'd been saying all along, that love doesn't fade. It just waits for you to be ready to receive it. As she cried, I didn't rush to wipe her tears. I let them fall. Tears have a way of washing away pride, baby. I saw her shoulders loosen, her breathing change. It was like the ice in her spirit had cracked, and warmth was finally finding its way back in. She said, "Mama, I didn't know I'd forgotten how to feel." And I said, "You didn't forget, sugar. Life just froze it for a while." You see, sometimes we go through seasons where love has to be preserved, not lost, not gone, just kept still. Maybe the pain's too fresh, maybe the heart's too heavy. So love goes quiet, waits in the dark like that box in the freezer, until we're ready to open the door and let it breathe again. That's what happened that day. The freezer didn't just hold food, it held forgiveness. When she opened it, she wasn't just looking at frozen memories. She was unlocking a part of herself that had been waiting to thaw. And once love thaws, it don't freeze again, baby. Not the same way. After that day, our home felt lighter. The air was sweeter. She started calling me just to talk, not to correct. She'd laugh again, really laugh the way she used to when she was a little girl. She'd stop by after work and say, "Mama, what's cooking?" And I'd smile and say, "Nothing you're allowed to judge, that's for sure." We'd both laugh until our sides hurt. That laughter that was love, thawed and alive. I think God uses little things like a freezer, a letter, a memory, to remind us that love isn't gone when it feels cold. It's just waiting for warmth, waiting for forgiveness, waiting for one heart to open the door and say, "I remember now." So now, every time I open that freezer and see that old tin box sitting there, I don't just see the past. I see grace, I see a second chance, and I whisper to myself, sometimes love has to freeze so it can survive the seasons. Because when it finally thaws, baby, it comes back stronger, warmer, deeper, and more real than it ever was before. Baby, let me tell you something about what we leave behind. Folks think a legacy is money, houses, or land. They think it's what people can count or touch or spend. But that's not true, sugar. The real legacy, the kind that outlives the body and whispers through generations, is made of love, gratitude, and forgiveness. And sometimes it's tucked away in places as humble as an old freezer, waiting for somebody to open it and remember. After that day, when Clarissa and I sat together with those letters spread out like treasures on the kitchen table, something changed in both of us. There was no more tension, no more raised voices, no more "Mom, you should do this," or "You don't understand." Instead, there was peace. We started to understand each other not as mother and daughter fighting for control, but as two women who had both survived life in their own ways. She said to me, "Mama, I used to think you held on to too many things, old recipes, old clothes, even old memories. But now I see you weren't holding on. You were keeping love alive." I smiled because she finally got it. See, baby, I wasn't saving letters and trinkets because I was stuck in the past. I was saving reminders. The world moves fast, people forget what mattered. Gratitude fades and forgiveness gets buried under pride. I wanted something that would make her stop just for a moment and remember. Remember where she came from, what it took to get her here, and who prayed her through every storm she didn't even know she had. So when I told her we're going to start writing new letters, she looked surprised. "New ones," she said. "Yes, baby, one for every month, not just from me to you, from you to me. We'll fill that box together." And that's exactly what we did. We'd sit at the table once a month with a cup of tea, a few slices of pie, and those little sheets of paper. Sometimes we'd write about good days, things we were thankful for. Sometimes we wrote apologies we never spoke out loud. Sometimes we just wrote, "I love you," and let that be enough. And every letter, no matter how small, went into that box. We didn't freeze the words out of fear anymore, we froze them out of celebration. We were preserving gratitude, not grief. And I realized something then: forgiveness is like food for the soul. If you don't make it fresh every now and then, your heart goes hungry, you start to starve without even knowing it. Writing those letters filled us both back up. We weren't just saving memories, we were feeding our souls. One day she said, "Mama, what will happen when you're gone? Who will open the freezer then?" I laughed and I said, "Maybe your daughter, baby, or your daughter's daughter. Whoever opens it, they'll find love waiting just like you did. Because love doesn't expire, no matter how cold the years get. If you tuck it deep enough in faith, it'll keep." That's the kind of legacy I wanted to leave, not one that shines, but one that warms. Not money that can be spent, but wisdom that can be shared. I told Clarissa, "Don't you worry about leaving behind riches. Leave behind love, leave behind forgiveness, leave behind words that heal long after you're gone." And she promised she would. She said, "Mama, I'm going to keep the freezer full, not just with food, but with memories, prayers, and thank yous." And Lord, that just about made my heart burst. Because she finally understood legacy isn't what you leave in someone's hands, it's what you leave in their heart. Now when folks come by and see that old freezer, they laugh and say, "Me, you've had that thing forever." I just smile and say, that freezer's got more love in it than most people got in their whole house. They think I'm joking, but I'm not. Because every letter inside that box, old or new, carries something real. It carries a prayer, a story, a lesson. It carries us. And one day, when I'm long gone, and Clarissa opens that freezer with her own child beside her, I hope she'll say, "This is where I found my mama's heart." So baby, if you've got someone you love, don't wait to tell them. Don't wait for the right time, make the time. Write it down, speak it out, tuck it somewhere safe. Because one day, when they need it most, they'll find it, maybe in a letter, maybe in a song, maybe in a freezer. And when they do, it'll thaw their heart and remind them that love never really leaves. That's what I want my legacy to be: a freezer full of faith, a box full of forgiveness, and a lifetime full of love that never stops giving warmth, no matter how cold the world gets.